For we do not write you anything you cannot read or understand. Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 1 and verse 13. We do not write anything that you can't read or that you can't understand. So somebody says, wait a minute, whoa. Didn't Peter say that Paul is hard to understand? Well, let's see what Peter said. 2 Peter, chapter 3, starting in verse 15, halfway through the verse. Just as our dear brother Paul also wrote you with the wisdom God gave him, he writes the same way in all his letters, speaking in them of these matters. His letters contain some things that are hard to understand, which ignorant and unstable people distort, as they do the other scriptures. The other scriptures, well, that makes Paul's writing scriptures, doesn't it? But are they contradicting each other? Listen carefully. Paul said, I didn't write anything that you can't read or that you cannot understand. In other words, it's not impossible for you to understand. Peter says Paul writes things that are hard to understand. There's a difference between hard to understand and impossible to understand. It is possible to understand Paul's writing, but it might be hard. And he says nothing that you can't read, and he's writing it to the church, or that you can't understand. He doesn't say, I'm not writing anything that your leaders can't understand. He doesn't say, I'm not writing anything that your professor can't understand. He says, I'm not writing anything that you can't understand. Now, how much of the New Testament did Paul write? More than half. And what's the tough parts of the New Testament? Well, everybody kind of agrees that pretty much the tough parts are all written by Paul. Unless Paul didn't write Hebrews, and I think he didn't write Hebrews, and some of Hebrews is kind of tough. But okay, if the New Testament's hard to understand, it's because Paul writes things that are hard to understand, and Paul says you can understand it. Do you know what a guild is? Some people compare them to labor unions, but they're quite different in a way. The guild has secret knowledge. The goldsmiths guild would protect their monopoly on being goldsmiths by having some parts of the refining of gold secret. Or even if it wasn't a secret, they would let on that it was difficult and a secret. So you didn't try to do it yourself. It's a curious phenomenon that the guilds became prominent in Europe about the same time that you start seeing the Protestant Reformation. Maybe there's no connection. Yeah, right. Because what I see is that just as the allopathic doctors have their guild that keeps everybody else out, and so many other groups have their guild that keeps everybody else out, only we know how to do this. that this mystery, you can't really understand the Bible, but your preacher does. And your preacher wouldn't be able to understand the Bible if he hadn't gone to seminary. There are secrets about the Bible they teach at seminary. And you know what? The preachers aren't preaching those secrets from the pulpit. So the teenage boys that want to be preachers, well, they can't get that just from hearing the sermons and lessons of the preacher. They would have to go to seminary to learn that secret or whatever. That's the way it seems. That's the impression that I think is deliberately given. Without us, that is, these seminaries, these higher education, you can't know God well enough for salvation in the collective sense. I mean, each individual, but not enough for a church to be having a ministry and saving people, and because there's these secrets that you only learn the answers to these questions at seminary. Paul is saying, and it's supposed to be from the Bible, it's a Bible seminary, right? Well, if it's a Bible seminary, you're teaching the Bible. And Paul says, there's nothing here, nothing in what I write that you can't understand. Now, it might be tough. You might have to struggle with it, but you can read it. You can understand it. And the biggest difficulty with understanding it is being willing to do it. So much of our inability to understand is really, we wish that particular truth would go away because it's inconvenient. But it's there. You can understand it. God promises to give you wisdom if you're willing to do it, if you're willing to follow it. There's nothing there that you can't understand.